Hello everybody. In today's video we're going to take a look at particle effects and how to create them in iClone. Particles and particle effects are used to create things such as smoke, fire, magic spells. You can create lots of different things using particle effects. So let's go ahead and get started. So to begin with, I'm going to bring a character into the scene to give us a sense of scale. And then I'm going to go to the Set tab where we'll find particles. And with like so many other assets in iClone, we can just drag and drop various effects into our scene. And if we hit play, we'll see that we get this explosion. We can take a look at a couple other effects. I'm going to get rid of this one here. And I'm going to go to Particle Legacy, and we'll take a look at some of the effects that we have available in here. So we've got some atmospheric effects, environment, fire and smoke, and so on. Let's take a look at some of these effects. We can try, for instance, this smoke effect. So I can drag it into my scene and drop it wherever I want and play it. Or we can also double click on our selection, which will put it at the origin, and we can play that as well. If we come over here to our Scene tab, you'll notice that under Particle we have the small smoke and the torch fire. I'm going to take the torch fire and move it over to the right. Now, what I just did, you have to be very careful of. I just made a mistake here, one that I tend to make a lot. Perhaps you do too. Because I was already on, in this case, approximately frame 200, you'll see that I have in fact animated my fire effect, and it's moving over time. So that in fact is a very powerful way to use these particle effects by animating them over time. If I don't actually want it moving in time, of course I can come down here to my timeline and simply select the keyframe I don't want, delete it. I'll go ahead and take this keyframe that's its position in 3D space, and I'll just drag it all the way to the left. And now we have these two effects, a fire effect and a smoke effect. I'm going to get rid of these two particle systems, go back to content, and we can take a look at some more. For instance, let's see, what shall we try here? Oh, let's try some of these environmental ones. We've got this blizzard. Double click on that and play. And you can see that this gives us this blizzard effect. We'll delete that, take a look at some more. We've got fog. Rain. And we've got some of these effects using snowflakes. To really get to know these particle systems, I recommend actually exploring and experimenting, just trying them out and see what they do. There are a lot of interesting particle systems that you'll find in here. And if you just play around with them and get to know them, you'll find creative ways to use them. But another way I think that is really effective for learning how to work with these particles is by working with them from scratch. And that's what we're going to take a look at now. I'm going to take this character and just we'll keep him in here for the time being, just again for a sense of scale. I'll return to content, and I'm going to create this very basic particle system here called basic01, and we'll play it and take a look at what we can do with it. So here's what the particle system looks like, a very, very basic system. Let's dive in and get to know how this is working. Now, of course, you have to make sure that you have the particle actually selected, which I do. And then in the Modify panel, we can start playing around with its properties. I'm going to go ahead and play this. You can see what it's doing. One of the most obvious ways to work with these particles, of course, is to change its position in 3D space, as well as its orientation. So for instance, I could take this particle system and rotate it. I'm going to rotate this, 90 degrees on the Y, play it, and you can see that it's now oriented in a different direction. So it's a very basic thing that you can do when working with these particles. I'm going to set it back to 0 so that it emits the particles going straight up. Let's take a look at some more properties. Again, continuing in the Modify panel over here, I'm going to scroll down, and here you'll see that we have both a texture and an opacity map. So, well, they're both textures. One is opacity, so that's for the areas that the white areas are opaque, the black areas are transparent. And then the color currently is set to white, although we can actually, you'll recognize or you'll notice that in fact they're blue, they're not white. Why is that? Well, if we scroll down, you'll see that there is in fact a color applied to it, this blue color found right here. So we can easily change the color, and we can change the color of the particle over time. Let's take a look at how we can go about doing that. Notice that in with this color here, we actually have something like a timeline here with these 4 marks here. And if I select this first one, for example, you'll see actually it's a slightly different blue color. Let's just change this color entirely so that you can see what's happening here. I'm going to select this and we'll go ahead and shift it over to red. Say OK. I'm going to select this second tick mark here. We'll shift that one over to blue. Select the third one, shift it over to green. And we'll select the last one and we'll shift it over towards red. Or maybe yellow. We'll switch it over to yellow. Okay, so now if we play this, I'll rewind and play, you'll see that it actually goes through the color spectrum and is changing color over time. Why? because we told it to, because we set these different tick marks here to different colors. So it's going to change over time. Now, something else you might be recognizing that's happening as we play this is that its opacity is changing over time as well. That also we can change with these 4 little tick marks here. So if I select the first one, what you'll notice is that it's actually 100% opaque. So in other words, it's got no transparency whatsoever. The second tick mark is at 67%, but we could crank that all the way up and make it entirely opaque, or we could crank it all the way to the left and make it entirely transparent. We could select this third tick mark and, let's make it transparent as well, just so you can see what happens here. And we'll select the fourth one, and it's currently set to be transparent. We'll go ahead and crank it all the way up so that it becomes opaque, so that you understand how this is working. Let's go ahead and rewind this and play it. You can see that these particles are becoming transparent, and then they become opaque again. Why? Again, because that's what we told it to do. I'm going to go ahead and set all of them back to being, well, they weren't set originally to being 100% opaque, but I'm going to make them all 100% opaque. In other words, no transparency, so that we can take a look at some of the other properties that we can work with these particle systems. So one thing that you'll also notice is that these are not perfectly circular, even though we've got this opacity map that is perfectly circular. So let's see what is happening there. Again, if we come over here to this particle key section here, and we select these different tick marks, you'll notice that they're growing over time. And the reason for that is that if I select the little tick mark to the far left here, you'll see that it's set to a width of 5, a height of 5. The second one is set to a width of 30, height of 17. The third one, 55 and 28, and the last one, 80 and 40. Let's see what happens if we set them all to 20 by 20. Okay, so we've set them all so that they will be a consistent size over the whole lifespan of these particles, and you can see what they're doing. Now they don't change size over time. This is a very powerful way of using the particles, because we can make them get smaller over time, get bigger over time, depending on the effect that we're going for. Let's try, for example, to make the particles get, they'll start out small, they'll start out very small. We'll start out at maybe 5 by 5. We'll have them get larger over time, so they become 20 by 20. Actually, let's go ahead and make that more like 40 by 40, make them much larger. We'll come here to the third tick mark, we'll make them 60 by 60. And then we'll have them get smaller over time, 5 by 5 again. And play it. And you can see that our particles get bigger and then smaller over time. Again, you can change both the width and the height, so this can be very powerful. Let's see what happens if we make it, for the second and third tick mark, we'll make it considerably taller than it is wide. Rewind that, play, and you can see the effect that that's having. Or we could even, maybe we'll make it start out very wide and end wide. So again, these techniques can be very powerful for when you're trying to make things like smoke or fire, or any other effect that you might be doing with these particle systems. I'm going to get rid of this particle system here, and I'm actually going to start from scratch once again with a very basic, the basic example here, so that we can take a look at a few more properties of this. I'm going to rewind it. We'll go once again to the Modify panel, and this time we'll take a look at some properties such as life. And currently it's set to 120 for a minimum lifespan and a maximum of 120, meaning that all these particles will live for basically 120 frames. In fact, we can test that out by scrubbing in our timeline. And you'll notice that when we get around well, here, let me make sure I'm consistent with scrubbing here. Scrub here in my timeline, we'll get to frame 120, and you'll see that the first particle disappears. You'll see that they disappear, each particle disappears after living for 120 frames. Now, what if we want the lifespan to be shorter? Let's see what happens. I'm going to just play this. You can see what it's doing with a lifespan of 120. Let's make the lifespan just 20 frames. Rewind, play, and you can see that now these particles don't live nearly as long. We can increase that life for them and make them 500 frames as well. And now they'll live for much longer. In fact, we'll have to zoom out before they even start disappearing. They start disappearing here. So that can be very powerful. What's interesting is that you can add a little bit of variation in here so that we can have a minimum and a maximum lifespan. Let's try making a minimum of 100 frames. So there's going to be a big range. Some of these particles will live longer than others. If we play this, we'll see. That there's a little bit more irregularity in it, and that can be something that can work really to your advantage when creating various effects. I'm going to bring the lifespan back down to 120 for both the minimum and the maximum. So maybe we want some rotation on these particles. Let's give that a try. I'm going to come over here to this rotate initial angle. Well, let's just play it first and see what we have here. And I'll bring that rotation initial angle to 90. Rewind, play. And now you can see that they've actually been rotated 90 degrees. I'm going to set that back to 0. And we'll add some rotate angular velocity here instead. Let's go ahead and try putting 90 in the maximum value here and apply that. And now you can see that we get some rotation over time. And the larger the number that we do here, the faster the rotation will be. Again, we're getting some variation in here because we have a minimum value of 0 and a maximum of 359. So they're not all rotating at the same velocity. Again, a very powerful way of creating some randomness within your particle system. I'm going to set that maximum back down to 0 so that we don't get any rotation, and we'll go ahead and take a look at some other properties of our particle system here. So we have two values here, this quota and emit rate. Currently, it's set to 4 per second, meaning that it is emitting 4 particles per second. If we change that to 1, it will only emit 1 particle per second. Or if we increase that number considerably, let's go ahead and put a value of 100, we will get 100 particles per second. Let's go ahead and add even more. We'll make it 500 particles per second. And something very interesting happens here. We get this almost like smoke signals in a sense, where it doesn't consistently emit the particles. Why is that? Well, here we have also a quota of 300, meaning that once we have 300 particles, it stops emitting until those particles disappear, and then it'll emit more particles. So if we want a continuous stream, we would have to up that value. And then we won't get that pulsating that we were getting before. But that can be very valuable, obviously, because it may be actually nice to have that more kind of pulsating particle system. I'm going to set these values back to a lower number. We'll go ahead and have it emit 20 particles per second with a quota of 300. And we'll take a look at some other properties. So we'll take a look at some other properties then. We've got this emit volume that refers to the size of our emitter. And currently, it's really just emitting from this point right here. Let's see what happens if we change the X value to 100 and the Y value to 100 and play that. And now you can see that the particles are being emitted over a larger area. In fact, if we want, let's try something a little bit more. Oh, instead of 100 by 100, we'll try 100 by 5. That should create something that's a little bit more like a line. Or maybe we want to even increase that more. We'll say 500. You can see that that's emitting over this line, basically. I'm going to pause that, rewind. We'll set it to, let's try 50 by 50. Or maybe, no, let's try 100 by 100 by 100. And then you can see that that's actually emitting over a more kind of three-dimensional space. We'll take a look at a few more properties here. I'm going to go ahead and play the particle system, and I'm going to adjust the spread. And you'll see that adds a certain randomness to it that can be very effective. Bring that back. We also have the direction randomness, which will add some randomness to the direction that they travel in. Some other important, let's say, values of these particles obviously would be the speed at which they get emitted. And what you'll notice is that we have this velocity property currently set to 600. And as you can imagine, if we were to decrease that number, let's set it to 100, you'll see that they move much more slowly. They still have the same lifespan, so they just don't travel as far because they're not going as fast. Or if we were to up that value, instead of 100 or instead of 600 like it was originally set to, let's try a value of 3000. And now you can see that they're moving considerably faster. I'm going to set that velocity back to 600. And yet some other values that we can change are gravity and wind. So if we look at the way that our world is oriented, it appears that z is the up value. So let's try applying a value to z for the gravity. I'm actually not sure what numbers I should be working with this, so let's go ahead and just try a value of 100 and see what that does. You can see that that's in fact making the particles travel upward even faster, even though we set their velocity to 600. Let's try making that a value of negative 100, and now you can see that they're falling downward. They're in fact moving upward because of their velocity, but then they come down because gravity overtakes them. Let's try decreasing that value to negative 50. And oh, now it's a little bit more apparent. We can try bringing that value down maybe to negative 10, see what we get with that. They don't have enough of a lifespan now to actually see them falling down. Let's just change, in this case, their lifespan. We'll go from 120 frames to 300. Rewind, play, and now you can see that they get emitted, they go up because of their velocity, and then they fall down because of gravity. So now that we know how the particle systems work, let's see how we can create something practical from it. I'm going to go ahead and start from scratch, so I'll get rid of that particle system, and I'm going to start once again with the basic particle system. So here's what we have, the very basic particle system, and I think what we'll try to do for this example is make something that looks like smoke. I think the first thing I'll focus on will be the life expectancy of it. So let's go ahead and just play this and think about how far we want the, well, first of all, actually, let's deal with the speed. So do we want the smoke to move at this speed, or do we want it to move more slowly or more quickly? Let's try making it a little less fast, so we'll go ahead and change its velocity. We can try halving that, making it 300. And playing that. I think that could work. I think I'll try 400. We'll try a velocity of 400. I think I'm going to want the smoke to go up higher, so I'm going to give it a longer life expectancy. So rather than just living for 120 frames, let's try 300. I'm going to change the minimum. That'll change the maximum as well. Play that. See how high they go. I think that's good. We'll go ahead and keep that as a maximum of 300, but let's go ahead and add a little bit of variation to this, a little bit of randomness. I'm going to try a minimum of 200, a maximum of 300. That way they won't all live for exactly the same amount of time. That might work for us. Maybe I'll go ahead and up that value a little bit. We'll make it 240. That'll give us enough randomness there with this effect. Something like that. Now for something like smoke, I think it makes sense that the particle will start out small and get larger, but I think I actually want it larger than this. So let's go ahead and come over here to the particle key here, and we'll go to the last little tick mark here. We do want it to become entirely transparent, so we'll leave that as it is. For the time being, I think I'm going to increase the size to 120 and 120. In fact, I'm going to make all of these perfectly round for the time being. We can try, oh, I don't know. Let's try 80 and 80. '40 and 40. And we'll go ahead and play that. See what that's looking like. I think for the size that can work. We might need to adjust it a little bit later, but that's okay. We can give this smoke a different color than this blue. And we can, of course, change that color over time. So let's go ahead and select the first tick mark here. And we'll change its color to, oh, we can change it to white or maybe kind of a gray. Change it to a gray value. I think for the time being, I probably will have it change color over time, but I'm going to select this gray value for now. Maybe I'll add that color in here actually to my custom colors. Say OK. I'm going to, for the time being, just change all of them to that gray value. Again, I probably will go back to this and change that later. And here's what we have. What else can we do to this to make it look a little more like smoke? Well, I think that I'm going to want it to emit more particles. And I think I want to add a little bit more irregularity to it. So I'm going to come over to the spread. We can try that out. That adds a nice little variation to it. We can try the direction randomness as well. And I think I'm definitely going to want more particles. 4 per second is really not going to be enough. Let's try increasing that. I'm going to try the number 22. I think that works pretty nicely. So I think that the smoke is coming along quite nicely. But one of the things that bothers me a little bit about it right now is this opacity map that it's currently using. Right now you can see that it really is perfectly circular, and I think that if we were to create an opacity map that had a little bit more irregularity to it, that it'll really improve this effect and make it look much more like smoke. And to do that, I think I'm going to create a new opacity map. I'm going to do that in Photoshop, but you could of course do this in other software as well. So here we are in Photoshop. You saw that the opacity map that we were using before was simply a black and white image, so that's what we're going to do. We're going to create a simple black and white image for our smoke effect. I'm going to make my background black, and I'm going to add a layer. There are a ton of different ways that we can create this smoke effect. One way would be very simple. We could literally just let me make sure I switch my color to white here. We could really just paint something, or maybe I want to change my brush, make some adjustments to my brush properties here. I can do some interesting things with that by changing some of the different parameters of this brush here. To add a little more variety to it. And then I can just paint my effect here, make it look kind of like a smoke cloud. This could work. I'm going to hide this layer and we'll try something else as well. This time what I'm going to do is go to Filter, Render, Clouds. I might come in here and adjust those levels slightly to get a little more contrast perhaps. I'm going to add a mask on this, and I'm going to flood that mask with black, and let me change my brush back to a regular brush here. This could also work for our effect that we're going for. And we'll go ahead and save this. Actually, I think what I'm going to do is flatten this image. And maybe I'll just adjust the levels real quick. I think that can work nicely. I'm going to go ahead and save this image. I'm just going to save it to my desktop. And we'll go back into iClone and try applying this as the opacity map. So here we are back in iClone. I'm going to select my opacity map here by double clicking on it. Here is this image that I just created. We'll go ahead and apply that. And you can see that that has in fact really helped this look much more smoke-like. Now that we have this opacity map on it and have given this a little bit more irregularity, I think that it might be nice to actually have a little bit of rotation. When it was perfectly circular, it made no sense to have any rotation. But now that it's a little bit more irregular, I think that we could add some rotation to it. and that will make this effect a little bit more believable. You can see that the smoke has a little bit of a rotation to it that is actually quite nice. So now that I have this smoke pretty much as I want it, I think I might adjust the colors a little bit more. Let's go back to where we can do that. Let's make sure I actually have my particle selected, of course. And we'll go ahead and work a little bit more on that color. We might even change the color over time. Here we are. Right now it's very bright, so I'm going to change the color. In fact, I'm going to give it a little bit of a hue, very subtle, maybe something like this. We'll add that color in there. I'm going to go ahead and apply that color to the different times on here. Subtle, but I think it does help give a little bit more believability to this smoke here. It's still kind of bright. Might be able to change that by changing the blend mode here. We can try that. Alpha kind of flattens it out. Addition is what it was set to. We've also got subtraction. That doesn't quite work. So I just tweaked my smoke effect just a little bit more, played around a little bit more with the colors, and I think I got it to a point that I'm pretty satisfied with it. This is what it looks like right now. After putting that work into it, I think that what I might do is go ahead and add it to the content so that I can use it in the future. So I'm just going to go ahead and play this briefly. And I'll pause it, go to my Set tab, and we'll go to Custom, Particle, and I'm going to add this effect. So now, I'll go ahead and name it, I'll call it My Smoke. And now I have this effect that I can add to other scenes later on, simply by dragging and dropping it in. So now that we've created our smoke particle system, let's see how we can change this and make it into something different, like fire, for example. And to do this, I'm going to go ahead and start a new scene, new project. And I'm going to drop that smoke that I just created into this scene, because now it's an asset that we can use in other projects if we wish. And we'll go ahead and start adjusting this to make it more fire-like. So we'll select the effect and then think a little bit about how it should differ from the smoke effect. So I think the first thing I'm going to do is work with the color. And I'm going to have it start with we'll start with a very dark red color. And then we'll make it a brighter red. The third color, we'll make it an orange. And maybe the last color, I'll We'll try black. We might end up changing that. Let's take a look and see what this looks like. So already it's starting to look a little more like fire. It's still behaving like smoke, but definitely more fire-like as far as the colors of it. I'm going to turn on the looping so I can just play this and have it continuously loop. Other things that we can change, of course, are we probably want to get rid of this rotation on it. I don't think we're going to want our fire to be rotating like the smoke, so I'll get rid of that. So now it's no longer rotating. We'll change the shape of it over time. I'm going to have it start out relatively big, I think. And we'll have it then become perhaps higher than it is wide. So let's just change some values here and see how they go. 40 and 80. Maybe I'll make this 20 and 80. And, oh, again, I don't really know if these would be good numbers for this or not, but we'll give it a try. Play that. You can see what that looks like. So the values I have right now for the first part is 20 and 20, 40 and 80, 20 and 80, and then 20 and 120. So it's continually getting taller and taller. It starts to look a little more fire-like. It's kind of slow. It's kind of slow for fire. I think that the fire wouldn't live as long. It wouldn't have as long of a lifespan as the smoke. And currently it's set to 240 and 300. Let's try changing that to a minimum of maybe 60 and a max of 80. That'll add a little variation within it, but we'll make it live a little less. I think that starts to look a little more fire-like. Perhaps we want it to, oh, let's see, we'll maybe have it emit faster. Currently, it's set to a velocity of 400. Let's try doubling that. I think I'll even go higher than that. Maybe try 1,400. And I might go back and once again reduce its lifespan. I'm going to try having it emit more particles. And instead of it being a flame like this, let's take the emit volume and make it over a wider base. So maybe we'll try 50 and 50. I think having them emit over a wider base is good. However, I think that's going to require maybe even more particles to be emitted. And I think I'm going to want the particles to start out actually larger than they're currently starting. So I'll go back to the particle key here, and let's try something more like, 50 and 50. Probably should adjust these colors a little more. I'm going to spend a few moments playing around with that. So I tweaked some of my fire a little bit, and here's what it looks like right now. Remember that this fire started from that smoke particle system that I created earlier. I used that as kind of the starting point for this. What have I done to this to make it different than the smoke that I'd created? Well, let's take a look. So it's still using the same opacity map as the smoke. The blend mode is set to addition. I did reduce the lifespan of the particles, so there's a range between 40 and 60 frames that each one of the particles lives for. I did end up adding a little bit of rotation to the smoke, and I think that helped it a little bit. Just -3 on the minimum and 3 on the max, so not a whole lot, but still enough to give it, I think, a little bit more believability. Regarding the colors, it starts out very dark, turns into this dark red, goes to this orange, and then goes to black. Also, I start with it being entirely transparent, actually. And then it gradually becomes more and more opaque, and then bring down the opacity again, make it more transparent towards the end. The size of the particles does change, and I made the actual particles more elongated, which is what gives the sense of these flames here happening. It's emitting at 100 particles per second right now. Remember that we also increased the emit volume, so it's on the X and the Y, it's got an area of 50 by 50. And I think I left the spread and the direct randomness the same as the smoke, but actually I can't remember specifically, but here it is. Here is my fire effect that I created. I think what I'm going to do is go ahead and name this my fire. Go ahead and play it. We'll go to content, and I'm going to go to custom because I'm going to add this with my smoke effect here. So make sure I have it selected. Click on the plus, and I'm going to call it my fire. So now I have this particle effect that I'll be able to use in future projects. Something else that we can do, of course, is we can take that smoke effect now, bring it back in here, maybe move it up a little bit like this, and we'll rewind and play. Looks like we'll need to move that smoke a little bit more. Actually, I just animated accidentally, so let me go ahead and delete that animation key. Bring it up. So now we have our fire, and with the other particle system in here, we can have it creating smoke as well. I might want to do a little bit more to that smoke to actually integrate it a little bit better with this fire. I think what I might do is lower it a little bit and bring down its opacity. Could still use a little bit of tweaking, but I think that learning how to create your own particle systems from scratch, it's going to really help your work stand out. If we take a look at some of the particle systems that are available to us, already in here where you can just quickly and easily drag in a smoke effect that has already been created. If we rewind this and we compare, I think that this fire that we just created here compares quite favorably to this asset that you can simply drop in and drag in here. It's kind of nice to be able to create your own particle systems to really help your work stand out from among the crowd. So in this video, we took a look at the particles in iClone. We took a look at some of the preset particles, and we looked at how we could create our own particles from scratch. In this case, I created some smoke and fire. So have fun creating your own particle systems in iClone, and I'll see you in the next video.